And we are back, and we'd like to welcome you to our new feature, one-on-one conversations with the candidates. And in studio with me now is one of the candidates for Attorney General, a write-in candidate, Attorney Peter Santos. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Thank you for having me, Nestor.
All right, before we get into the points you want to make, I'd like to maybe give your background, your education and qualifications for the job.
Yes, so first of all, I have 30 years of public service. I was born in Agate. We were dirt poor. You know, we didn't have indoor plumbing. So I grew up on public assistance. You know, I'm just a common man. Didn't even expect to graduate from high school. But by some miracle, it happened. And then right after high school, I went into the Guam Police Department where I served for 8 years. While I was there, one of my mentors, my supervisor at the time, pushed me to apply for college under the Doc Sanchez program. So I did that, went to UOG, got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And then at the same time I was at UOG, I was also part of ROTC. And so I decided to go active duty, to leave Guam for a little while with the intent of coming back to get some training, some experience, some further education. That happened right before 9/11 in 2001. So unfortunately, because of the timing, I got deployed to the combat zone 3 times back to back to back. And we were under stop loss, stop move. So when that was lifted, I put in my paperwork to resign my commission, come back to Guam and resume my service to the people of Guam, probably at GPD again. However, the Army offered me something that I couldn't refuse. They offered me to pay for law school to stay for a little longer. And so I did that, got my law degree, served as a JAG, deployed again. And then I came to a crossroads where I could either stay for, again, additional money that they were offering me to stay, a $60,000 retention bonus, or I can come home and be a prosecutor. And so I chose to come home and be a prosecutor, gave up the $60,000 retention bonus, gave up, or I actually took a 40% pay cut to do that. I came home under Elizabeth Barrett Anderson. Things were going well. I was, enjoying my job as a prosecutor. That's what I want to do. That's what I've aspired to do since I was a police officer and worked with prosecutors here on Guam. Didn't have a plan to actually become a prosecutor, but the opportunity presented itself. So then in, of course, 2018, Levin Camacho won the election. Elizabeth Barrett Anderson left. Things changed dramatically there. I didn't want to leave, but I ended up leaving, and I'm at the alternate public defender where I'm a defense attorney. So all those years of public service, I think, is what qualifies me to be the Attorney General. And I'm stepping up to the plate because the entire population of Guam, it seems, are not happy with the 2 named candidates, or the 2 candidates, because it's a repeat of 2018, and they both have already had, experience with Doug and experience with Levin, and the public is extremely dissatisfied. So that's why I decided to step up as a write-in candidate in the general election.
All right, I was going to ask you, but you already answered it, why you're running. One of the issues that comes up a lot when we talk about the Attorney General's office is that we have a drug problem here on Guam, and we've had one for a long time. I remember as far back as the 1990s reporting about crystal methamphetamine, ICE, as the drug of choice for Guam, and it's still prevalent now. How would you address, as Attorney General, the drug problem, which is also blamed for a lot of the petty crime and violent crime that is going on, and it appears to be growing?
Yes, well, first of all, I was here serving as a police officer when the drug first hit. We called it the ice storm, when the ice storm first hit in the early 90s. And we didn't know what hit us. But over the years, we, learned what it was, where it was coming from, and we had some successes, not a lot, with trying to stem it. We've had the benefit, I say benefit, but we've had the benefit of living with this for so long now, and being able to understand the trends. And what we're seeing today is that, it's become the drug of choice. More and more different sources are available, and that's why it's become, more available to the mass public, and the prices are coming down. It's just because more and more people are getting into the game. The treatment, I've been involved. I was the senior drug prosecutor, or the lead drug prosecutor, when I was up at the AG's office. So the treatment courts that have been established, those are very worthy, and they are working despite what some people may feel. But that's not enough to address the problem. The crux of the problem is with it coming in so easily and readily. And so it's about interdiction. It's about preventing it from coming in the first place. And how do we address that? So we have to work with our local partners as well as our federal partners, and to use our resources wisely. And when I say wisely, because it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. We have to develop more human intelligence, right? We have to get more information about who is bringing it in, how they're bringing it in, and deploy our resources, in a more intelligent and smarter way. And that's the only way we're going to make a dent. If we concentrate on interdiction, and interdiction requires smart strategy.
Yeah. Are we putting away the main dealers, or are we putting away the low-level guys, and the main dealers are still there? What seems to be the main problem in your view?
So the way, in my experience here on Guam as a prosecutor and working with the federal government, it seems like there's a division of labor, right? Like the DEA and the federal government are the ones that are dealing with and addressing the dealers and the importers, right? And they have, of course, stiffer penalties than we do, right? And they have more resources than we do to address that. And then we're dealing more with the lower end dealers and the users. However, there could be a little bit more information sharing, but for those of us who are experienced with this kind of cat and mouse game, information is kind of like closely guarded. So I would try to foster a more collaborative effort between the locals and the federal government.
Yeah. Another big crime problem on Guam that we're seeing is domestic violence and stalking and that sort of thing. How would you address that growing issue?
Well, let me step back here and try to explain some of the issues or the problems of why we have these repeat offenders. A large part of it, Nestor, to be quite blunt with you, is incompetent prosecution. So we have cases that are being dismissed at the charging level, or that are being dismissed on the eve of trial because either there's not enough prosecutors or the cases were not handled correctly to begin with. And so that causes these individuals to be released without conditions, and then they go back and reoffend. And so by the time we finally get them to hold them accountable, they've had 4 or 5 or 6 cases, right? When it never should have gotten to that point. From the first case, it should have been dealt with correctly. And the court has resources. The government of Guam, the federal government, provides resources for families to address family issues, to address abusers, anger management classes, family counseling, that kind of stuff. And again, the system can't work if one of the main parts, which is prosecution, is broken.
Yeah, so how do we deal with that? Because, in the media, we get on a daily basis the magistrate's complaint, and we see this. Anecdotally, we see that, this person was charged with stalking or some other kind of abuse, and it shows that they have a prior record of the same thing, and in fact they have the victim has a restraining order against that person. So it seems like it's like this vicious circle, and it needs to be broken somehow. And what are your ideas for breaking that?
Well, we gotta fix prosecution. I know my opponents are gonna say this guy is just talking about prosecution. Well, that's the big elephant in the room, right? Nothing gets done correctly if we can't even prosecute. And so we have to fix prosecution, because prosecution is a big stakeholder and a big member in the team in these therapeutic courts. And that's one of the things that when you go to the training for these therapeutic courts, you know, like family violence court, you know, veterans treatment court, adult drug court, one of the themes that they teach all the stakeholders and all the people in the criminal justice system is that prosecution has to be more involved. Prosecution has to be more collaborative, you know, and less of this mindset of us against them, right? They have to be part of the team, because this is a team effort. And when prosecution either is not collaborative or doesn't even show up and has to forfeit the game, right, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. Is recidivism a big problem here? Not just in, you know, domestic violence and in drug cases, but in overall prosecution. I mean, are we seeing that?
Absolutely. And you know why? Because people aren't being held accountable, right? People aren't being held accountable. They're allowed to do this over and over again without consequence.
Yeah.
And that's why you have recidivism.
Yeah. Let's talk about a more recent development, and that is the Chinese immigrants that are coming in illegally from the CNMI. I mean, they're getting a little smarter. It used to be that they'd come in through the Richitian, and now the most recent case, they went all the way around and came in through Pago Bay. So there seems to be a very organized trafficking, if you will, of these Chinese immigrants into Guam. What are your thoughts first on how serious that a problem that is, and how can it be addressed?
It is a serious problem, first of all. It's not a federal problem. Let's get that straight. Okay, so the federal government, for these people who have entered into the United States legally, for them to move from one jurisdiction to another within the United States, that's not a federal government problem, right? But they can assist us, of course, because they're the ones that allow the folks to come in. And especially these folks are particularly, they're supposed to be tethered, so to speak, to their sponsors, right? It's not like, there are different types of people that come to the US legally, but people who come for work, right? They're sponsored and they're supposed to be tethered. And so what has to happen is the locals, both the CNMI locals and the locals here on Guam, need to figure out, again, with human intelligence, find out, you know, who's doing this and stop it at the source. Because when they come here to Guam, you know, that's nothing, the federal government is not concerned with that, and it's not a deportable offense. It is a it's a violation of local statutes, because when you come by either plane or boat, right, you have to have the proper documentation, and it's a misdemeanor not to do that, right? It doesn't matter who you are. Even if you are a U.S. citizen from CNMI and you come down here to Guam, you still have to come in with proper documentation, right? So it's going to take for us to figure out who here on Guam is sponsoring this, who in the CNMI is sponsoring this, and put a stop to it. Because the only way to stop it is to stop it over there and not even allow it to come over here.
Yeah, currently there is a task force made up of Guam officials. Is there a need to include the CNMI officials as part of a task force?
I think they're not part of the task force, but I think they're working in collaboration, right?
Okay.
So.
All right. Next question. What What's your take on the staffing? I think that has come up before, the staffing over at the Attorney General's office. Is there a need for more staff, a more diverse staff? What are your thoughts?
So it's a recruitment and a retention issue. It's not a money issue, okay? The prosecution division has had lapses because there's just not enough prosecutors. And so what we've seen with both Doug and Levin is they've chased prosecutors away, all right? When I was up there, I recruited on my own dime, and I brought 6 prosecutors over here. They're all gone already, all right? I've watched prosecutors leave since Levin became the AG. I've watched them consistently leave till right now, Nestor, we have only 2 prosecutors who are qualified to prosecute serious crimes. There's 8 prosecutors that carry full caseloads, including these 2 prosecutors that are qualified. So the other 6 prosecutors are relatively new, and they shouldn't be handling any felony cases, but they are, and they're losing at record pace, right? We're losing. I just won 3. I got 3 acquittals in a row, and I'm in a trial right now, and I suspect, I have a good feeling that we're going to get an acquittal in all charges in this case as well. I don't want to, jinx it, right? Knock on wood, but it's a reflection that the team up there is very young and inexperienced, right? And so we've seen that Doug and Levin chase prosecutors away. I have gotten commitments from former prosecutors here on Guam that if I become AG, they're going to come back. And I've even gotten promises from non-prosecutors in the local bar that said they'll try prosecuting if I become AG. They'd want to come work for me, right? And then last week, I think I told you, 3 brand new people were admitted into the Guam bar, and one guy was a local guy who was born and raised here on Guam, and he became a prosecutor, but not here on Guam, over in Washington State, because although he wants to be a prosecutor and Guam is his home, he doesn't want to prosecute for Levin.
Yeah. What's your view on plea agreements? Is it an effective way of relieving the case backload, or what are your thoughts on plea agreements?
So traditionally, right, it's an indispensable tool. Not all cases should be going to trial. About 95% of cases get resolved by plea agreement, right? And we're seeing that now, but the difference is the prosecution is not bargaining from a position of strength anymore. They're bargaining from a position of extreme weakness. And so that's why we're getting all these sweetheart deals. Even the judges at the court are rejecting the plea agreements because they're too sweet. They're way too sweet. The judges are like, what's going on here? Prosecution, you're giving away the store. And that's because they don't have the manpower, the firepower, or the experienced prosecutors to take these cases to trial.
Other than the experienced prosecutors or attorneys that you mentioned earlier, how would you go about recruiting then more experienced prosecutors from off island?
We just recruited 2 at the alternate public defender last week. We hired 2. So it can be done. Now, these were done remotely, but I believe that face-to-face recruiting pays off way more. The current AG has hired a headhunter or whatever, and they're putting announcement at law schools, right? But that's one, you're going to get a brand new attorney that's still going to need a few years of training, right? And so far, there haven't been any bites, right? So the way to do it is to actually get people to go out and do face-to-face recruiting, and maybe even not just law schools, right? I am part of the reserve, the U.S. Army Reserve, and they're always recruiting me to come go somewhere else. And so I could tap into that too and see who in my reserve brethren, and when I say brethren, that's both brothers and sisters, who somewhere, needs a regular job that, aside from their reserve Army job, who needs a regular job, come out and work out here for a little while.
Yep.
So it's that personal face-to-face recruiting that works best.
Yeah, the criminal prosecution division gets, usually most of the news, but of course the AG's office is made up of a number of different divisions. There's the civil litigation, there's the consumer division.
Child support, yeah.
Child support. How are those other divisions in your mind working?
They're actually, from what I can see, and while I was up there, they're doing very well. But I am a firm believer of you always leave something better than you found it, and also that there's always room for improvement. I was a chief of administrative law for a little while, and we dealt with procurement, contracts, litigation, all kinds of things, right? EO, workplace things, so sexual harassment, all that. So I'm familiar with how to deal with those types of cases, but I've been a part of many different organizations. I've had that experience that there are some practices, some processes, and some systems that I have ideas that I can implement at the AG's office to improve services, because I've talked to people in the community and a lot of them are very disgruntled because it takes forever for them to get anything, when they ask for a legal opinion or when they ask for services, some of the government agencies that can't afford to hire their in-house counsel, they have to rely on the Attorney General for legal services. And they're very dissatisfied with the delay it takes for them to get services out of the AG's office.
Yeah. Real quickly, how would you reorganize the AG's office? Would there be a need to do so?
No, not necessarily. Well, I'd get rid of the general counsel position, which was made up by Levin. I would, leave everything as it is. Just like the laws on Guam, a lot of the laws are in place. It's just we need to implement it better, right? We need to enforce it better. And so that's the same thing I see with the Attorney General's office. It's gone through, 5 elected Attorney Generals already? And so they've pretty much, why reinvent the wheel, right? Just go in and provide leadership and guidance and, hold people accountable and provide better services to our island.
All right, Attorney Santos, you've got about 2 minutes left. I want you to look into that camera and tell the people of Guam why they should vote for you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, in 2018, we saw the same 2 candidates, Douglas Moylan and Levin Camacho. 2018 was a huge rebuke of Douglas Moylan. 2022 in the primary was a rebuke of Levin Camacho, because Levin Camacho won by a landslide in 2018, but he barely won by 300 votes in the primary. So what does that mean? It means that the people of Guam are dissatisfied with both of these candidates. And so I ask you to write me in for Attorney General of Guam if you haven't decided yet which candidate, is the worst candidate between Levin and Doug. Because that's really what a lot of people are faced with. They're trying to choose who is the lesser of the 2 evils. Well, there's a third choice. There's me, who has 30 years of public service, who rose through the ranks, who has served in the trenches with everybody. I have literally bled for this island and for our country. So I want to step up to the plate, because this is the time. If there was ever a time to vote for the underdog, if there was ever a time to make history and make a write-in win, this is the time. We are in a crisis, ladies and gentlemen. And, Doug knows we're in a crisis. Levin doesn't want to admit that we're in a crisis. But, we've seen how Doug runs the Attorney General's office. So we don't want to go back to Doug. We want to keep the AG's office a Doug-free workplace, right? And then we also need to get Levin out of there, because he's not doing the job. He's a great guy. He's a great environmental lawyer, but you need someone in there that's going to do the tough work, and someone who's experienced and who knows what right looks like. And that person is me. So please, I humbly ask you, write in Peter Santos for Attorney General of Guam this election. Thank you.
All right, Peter Santos, thank you for joining us, a write-in candidate, as he said, for the Attorney General. We're going to take a short break and be back with more Hot Spot right after this.